The phone rang at 3 in the morning, and Dante Rizzo knew before he answered that something was wrong. Vittorio Marchetti never missed a check-in call, not once in 11 years. But the phone on the other end just rang, and when Dante finally reached the private line at the Marchetti estate, a woman's steady voice answered instead of the boss himself. "He is resting," Rosa Delgado said. "He will not be taking calls." Dante stood in his kitchen with his heart pounding. Resting. At 3 in the morning. He had known Rosa for 3 years, ever since she started working as the housekeeper at the estate. And in that time, he had never once heard her voice shake. She did not sound afraid. She sounded like a woman guarding a secret with her whole body. By sunrise, the news had already spread through every corner of the organization. Vittorio Marchetti, the man they called an unshakable leader in the business world, the man whose name alone kept rival companies from crossing certain lines, had not been seen in 2 days. His car sat untouched in the garage. His phone sat dark on his desk, and the only person who seemed to know anything at all was refusing to say a word. Rosa stood at the tall kitchen window that morning, watching the driveway fill with black cars. Men in dark suits climbed out, adjusting their jackets, glancing at each other with the kind of nervous energy that spreads through a room like smoke. She had expected this. She had known, the moment she made her choice 4 days earlier, that this exact scene would happen. Cars in the driveway, questions at the door, suspicion crawling into every corner of a company that ran on the appearance of control. She smoothed her apron, took a breath, and walked to answer the door before anyone could knock twice. "Where is he?" Dante said, not bothering with a greeting. Behind him stood 2 other men she recognized from years of quiet routine, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates while they spoke in low voices about numbers and deals she was never meant to understand. Today, their faces were different, sharp, searching. "He asked not to be disturbed," Rosa said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Dante studied her for a long moment. Rosa was not a small woman, and she did not shrink under his stare the way some people did. She stood with her shoulders back, her chin level, her hands folded in front of her, like she had all the patience in the world. It unsettled him more than tears would have, more than panic. A woman with nothing to hide does not usually look this calm, he thought, and a woman with everything to hide should not be able to fake it this well. "You understand what happens if something happened to him," Dante said quietly. "You understand what happens to a company like ours when the man at the top disappears. People get nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Mistakes get noticed by people who are already looking for a reason to move in." "I understand more than you think," Rosa said. She closed the door gently, not slamming it, just closing it the way she closed every door in that house, like something that mattered was on the other side and deserved to be treated with care. Dante stood on the step a moment longer, staring at the wood grain, before he turned and walked back to his car with his jaw tight and his mind already spinning through a dozen possibilities, none of them good. Inside, Rosa leaned her back against the door and let out a slow breath. Her hands were trembling now that no one could see them. She had told the truth, in a way. He was resting. What she had not told Dante, what she would not tell anyone, was where, or why, or what it had cost her to get him there. 4 days earlier, the house had been quiet in the way it always was, late at night, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel loud. Rosa had been carrying a tray of tea to the small sitting room near the east wing, a room Vittorio almost never used, when she heard something she should not have heard. A crash, then silence, then nothing at all. She had found him on the floor of his private study, one hand still gripping the edge of his desk, his face the color of old paper. For a full second, her mind went blank with fear, the tray still balanced in her hands, the tea slowly going cold. Then, instinct took over. She set the tray down without spilling a drop, dropped to her knees beside him, and pressed 2 fingers to his throat the way her mother had taught her back home. Back before any of this. Back when she was just a girl learning how to take care of people because someone in her family always needed taking care of. His pulse was there. Weak, but there. "Mr. Marchetti," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Vittorio, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening the moment he understood where he was and who was looking at him. Even half-conscious, even pale and shaking, there was a flicker of something in his face that looked almost like shame. "Do not call anyone," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "You need a doctor." "No doctors." His hand closed around her wrist, weak but urgent. "No hospitals, no calls to Dante, no calls to anyone. Rosa, please." She stared at him, torn between everything she had been taught about emergencies and the raw fear in his eyes, a fear she had never once seen on him in 3 years of watching him move through that house like he owned every shadow in it. This was not a man afraid of pain. This was a man afraid of being seen as weak, and in his world, she understood without being told, weakness could be more dangerous than any illness. "Tell me what's happening to you," she said quietly. "All of it, or I call for help right now." It took him a long moment to answer, his breathing slow and careful, like every word cost him something. He told her about the headaches that had started months ago, the dizziness he had been hiding behind sunglasses and long meetings held while sitting down, the tests he had taken quietly, alone, at a private clinic 2 towns away where no one would recognize his name. A condition with his heart, made worse by years of stress and sleepless nights, and a life that never allowed him to slow down even for a single day. The doctors had told him to rest completely, for weeks, without any distractions, without any pressure. He had laughed in their faces and gone straight back to work. "If anyone in the company finds out," he said, "if my rivals find out, if my own people find out I am anything less than solid as stone, everything I have built comes apart. You do not understand how these things work." "Then help me understand," Rosa said, "because right now you are lying on the floor of your own study, and the only thing you are protecting is your pride." Something in her voice made him go still, not the tone of an employee, the tone of someone who genuinely could not stand to watch him hurt himself out of fear. He looked at her properly then, maybe for the first time in 3 years, not as the woman who kept his house running, but as a person with her own strength, her own steel, sitting on the floor beside him at midnight, refusing to look away. That was the night Rosa made her decision. She helped him to his bed, sat with him through hours of restless, uneasy sleep, and by morning she had already worked out a plan in her mind, turning it over and over the way she once turned over difficult choices back when she was younger and had far less to lose. She knew about the old property. A small house 2 hours outside the city, forgotten by almost everyone in the organization, left to Vittorio by an uncle who had wanted nothing to do with the family business. She had been there twice before, sent to check on repairs, to air out old rooms, to make sure the roof still held against the weather. No company records tied it to him directly. No rival would think to look there. It was, she realized with a strange, quiet certainty, the perfect place to disappear. She proposed the idea to him the next evening, and he refused 3 separate times before she finally said the words that made him stop arguing. "You can keep pretending you are made of stone until it kills you," she said, "or you can trust one person, just one, long enough to heal. I am not asking you to be weak. I am asking you to be alive." He looked at her for a long time after that. Something behind his eyes shifted, some wall she had never seen move before, cracking just slightly at the edges. 30 days, he finally said. "No more. 30 days, and then I go back, and none of this ever happened." 30 days, she agreed. They left before dawn 2 days later, in her car instead of his, taking back roads instead of the highway, Rosa driving, while Vittorio sat quiet and pale in the passenger seat, watching the city fade behind them in the mirror, like a life he was not sure he would recognize when he returned to it. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. There was nothing simple to say. But somewhere around the halfway point, as the city gave way to open fields and quiet hills, Rosa glanced over and saw him watching her instead of the road ahead, and something passed between them that neither one had a name for yet. By the time they reached the old house, the sun was fully up, casting long gold light across a yard gone wild with tall grass and untrimmed hedges. Rosa parked the car and sat for a moment, taking in the silence, the birds calling somewhere in the trees, the complete and total absence of anyone who might recognize either of their faces. "This is it," she said. "For the next 30 days, this is the only world that exists." Vittorio stared at the small house, plain and unremarkable, nothing like the estate he had spent years building into a fortress of glass and steel. For a man who measured his worth in power and control, stepping into that quiet, forgotten place felt like stepping off the edge of everything familiar. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted, so quietly she almost missed it. "I do not know how to just stop." Rosa reached over and, for the first time since she had found him on the floor of his study, took his hand in both of hers, steady and warm. "You do not have to know how," she said. "You just have to let someone help you learn." Back in the city, the driveway at the estate stayed full of black cars for the rest of that first week. Dante paced the halls of the Marchetti offices with his phone pressed to his ear, fielding calls from partners who wanted answers he did not have, rivals who smelled opportunity in the silence, and employees who whispered in corners about what might really be happening behind those closed estate doors. Every question led back to the same locked room in his mind. Where was Vittorio Marchetti? And why did the one woman who seemed to know refuse to say a single word? No one. Not Dante, not the rivals circling closer every day, not a single person in that entire company thought to look for the answer in a forgotten house 2 hours outside the city, where a housekeeper with steady hands and quiet strength was doing something no doctor, no bodyguard, and no business partner had ever managed to do. She was keeping Vittorio Marchetti alive, one day at a time, and in the process, without either of them fully realizing it yet, she was becoming the one person he could not imagine losing. The first night at the old house, Vittorio barely slept. Rosa heard him moving through the hallway near midnight, restless, pacing the way a caged animal paces, and she found him standing at the window of the small living room, staring out at darkness with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You should be resting," she said gently. "I have not stopped moving in 15 years, he said, without turning around. "I do not know what my body is supposed to do with stillness." She came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and together they looked out at the black shape of the trees against a sky full of more stars than either of them had seen in years, stars that never showed themselves through the glow of the city. "Then we will learn together," she said, "one day at a time." He turned his head slightly, studying her profile in the dim light, and for the first time since she had found him, collapsed on his study floor, something in his expression softened into what almost looked like hope. Neither of them knew, standing there in that quiet borrowed house, how much the next 30 days would change them both, or how much danger was already beginning to gather back in the city they had left behind, closing in slowly on an empire that no longer had anyone standing guard at its gates. Rosa made him a cup of warm tea that night, something simple with honey, and sat with him at the small kitchen table until his shoulders finally started to loosen. She told him small stories about her own life, the town she grew up in, the way her mother used to hum while cooking, the years she spent learning to care for people who could not always care for themselves. He listened more closely than she expected, asking quiet questions, learning things about her that 3 years of living under the same roof had never taught him. "I never asked you anything real before this," he said at one point, staring down at his cup. "Not once in 3 years." "You never had a reason to," she said. "I was just part of the house to you." "I do not think that is true anymore." She did not answer that. She only refilled his cup and let the silence settle between them, comfortable now, instead of heavy. The first quiet moment, either of them had felt in longer than either wanted to admit. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass, and somewhere far away, in a city neither of them could see from that window, the first cracks were already beginning to spread through the empire he had left behind. The days at the old house began to take on a rhythm neither of them had expected. Rosa woke early, before the sun fully cleared the hills, and moved through the small kitchen preparing simple meals meant to build his strength slowly. Food with less salt, more vegetables, nothing heavy on a heart that needed gentleness instead of stress. Vittorio, who had spent 15 years surrounded by chefs and assistants and people paid to anticipate his every need before he asked, found himself standing in the kitchen doorway on the third morning, watching her cook, feeling something close to wonder at how easily she moved through a space that was not even hers. "You do not have to watch," she said without turning around. "You could sit down. Rest, remember." "I have been resting for 3 days," he said. "I am starting to understand why I never allowed myself to do it before. There is too much time to think." "Then think about something other than the company for once," she said, sliding a plate toward him. "Think about breakfast." He almost smiled. It was small, barely there, but she caught it, and something warm settled in her chest at the sight of it. In 3 years, she had seen him smile perhaps a handful of times, and always in the careful, practiced way of a man performing confidence for an audience. This smile was different, quiet, unguarded, meant for no one but her. They fell into a routine over the following days. Mornings were for slow walks around the property, Rosa insisting on gentle movement to keep his body from stiffening, both of them walking the overgrown paths behind the house while birds called from the trees and the air smelled like grass and distant rain. Afternoons were for rest, though rest for Vittorio meant sitting on the porch with his eyes closed, listening to the wind, learning slowly how to simply exist without a phone in his hand or a decision waiting to be made. Evenings belonged to conversation, long and unhurried, the kind of talking that only happens when two people have nowhere else to be and nothing left to hide. It was during one of those evenings, on the 6th night, that Vittorio told her the truth about how he became the man everyone in the city both respected and feared. "My father built the company from nothing," he said, staring into the small fire Rosa had built in the old stone fireplace. "He used to say that softness was a door, and any door left open eventually gets walked through by someone who means you harm. I believed him for a long time. I built my entire life around never leaving a single door open." "And now?" Rosa asked. He looked at her across the firelight, and for a long moment he did not answer, as if searching for words he had never needed before. "Now I am beginning to wonder if he was wrong," he said, "or maybe I was simply never brave enough to find out." Rosa felt something shift inside her chest, warm and dangerous and impossible to ignore. She had spent 3 years keeping a careful, respectful distance from this man, treating him with the same quiet professionalism she gave every task in that house, and now, sitting across a small fire in a forgotten home 2 hours from everything either of them knew, that distance was dissolving faster than she knew how to stop. "You are not weak for opening a door, Vittorio," she said softly. "You are only weak if you never learn who is worth letting inside." He held her gaze for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them, and something passed between their eyes that neither one dared to name out loud. It was Rosa who finally looked away first, standing and gathering the empty cups from the small table, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow we walk the far path, the one by the creek. Your color is better already. Another week and your strength will start coming back properly." He watched her walk toward the kitchen, and something in his chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with his condition, and everything to do with a feeling he had not allowed himself in longer than he could remember. Back in the city, the situation was growing more dangerous by the day. Dante had managed to keep the company running on the surface, holding meetings, signing contracts that did not require Vittorio's personal approval, keeping up appearances for anyone watching from the outside. But beneath that surface, cracks were widening. Partners who once trusted Vittorio completely began asking harder questions. A few smaller deals fell through when Vittorio could not be reached to finalize them personally. And worst of all, a rival company known as Castellano Holdings, run by a sharp, ambitious man named Nathan Castellano, had begun making quiet moves into territory that had always belonged to Marchetti interests. Nathan Castellano had waited years for an opening like this one. He had built his own company carefully, patiently, always aware that Vittorio Marchetti stood as the single greatest obstacle between himself and true control of the city's business landscape. When word reached him that Vittorio had vanished, that his own housekeeper was the only one claiming to know where he was, Nathan felt something close to excitement stir in his chest for the first time in years. 30 days of silence, he said to his second-in-command, a calm, calculating woman named Grace Whitfield, as they sat in his office overlooking the city skyline. A man like Marchetti does not simply disappear for 30 days without a reason. Either he is dying somewhere quietly, or he has lost his nerve completely. Either way, this is our opening. His people are still holding the company together, Grace said carefully. Dante Rizzo is not incompetent. He has kept the appearance of stability. Appearance is not the same as strength, Nathan said, his eyes sharp with calculation. We move slowly. We test the boundaries. We take small pieces first. Contracts here, clients there. Nothing large enough to draw a full response. By the time anyone realizes how much ground they have lost, it will already be ours. Grace nodded, though something in her expression suggested she was not entirely convinced this quiet approach would remain quiet for long. She had worked alongside Nathan for 6 years, long enough to know that ambition like his rarely stayed patient once it tasted the first small victory. Back at the old house, Rosa remained unaware of exactly how fast the danger was growing, though she was not naive. She checked in with a trusted contact twice during that second week, a longtime friend named Claire Bennett, who worked in the estate's front office and had no connection to the deeper, more dangerous parts of the company. Claire knew only that Rosa had taken personal leave to care for a private family matter, a story Rosa had carefully constructed before they left the city, and through Claire, Rosa received small, careful updates on the general mood without revealing anything about where she truly was. Everyone is nervous, Claire told her during one brief phone call, her voice hushed even though she was alone in her small office. Dante is holding things together, but people are talking. Some say Mr. Marchetti is sick. Others say he has left the company entirely. There are even people saying Castellano Holdings has started reaching out to some of our smaller clients. Rosa's stomach tightened at that last piece of information, though she kept her voice steady. Tell no one you spoke to me. Not Dante, not anyone. I would never, Claire said. But Rosa, whatever is happening, please be careful. This feels bigger than a simple leave of absence. After she hung up, Rosa stood in the quiet kitchen for a long moment, turning the information over in her mind. She had known, from the very first night she made her decision, that time was not a luxury they had in unlimited supply. Every day Vittorio remained hidden was a day his rivals grew bolder, a day his own people grew more uncertain, a day the empire he had spent his whole life building grew a little more fragile. But she also knew, with complete certainty, that pushing him to return before his body was truly ready could undo every bit of progress he had made, or worse. She found him later that evening sitting on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills in streaks of orange and gold, looking more at peace than she had ever seen him look in 3 years of watching him move through rooms like a man carrying the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. Something is wrong, he said, without turning to look at her. I can hear it in the way you walked out here. She sat down beside him, choosing her words carefully. Castellano Holdings has started making moves, small ones for now. Nothing that cannot be undone if you return soon and reassert control. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly, the old sharpness returning to his eyes for the first time since they had arrived. "Nathan Castellano," he said quietly. "I should have known he would try something the moment he sensed weakness." "You are not weak," Rosa said firmly. "You are healing. There is a difference, even if the world outside this house refuses to see it that way." "The world outside this house does not care about the difference," Vittorio said. "It only cares about strength and the appearance of strength, and right now, I have neither." Rosa reached over and took his hand, the same way she had on the drive to the house that first morning, steady and warm and unafraid. "Then we make sure that by the time you walk back through those doors, you have both. Real strength this time. Not the kind built on exhaustion and fear, but the kind that comes from actually being well." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something passed between them in that fading evening light that neither one could pretend was simple gratitude anymore. It was Rosa who leaned in first, just slightly, and Vittorio who closed the remaining distance, and for a long, quiet moment, neither the company nor the danger gathering back in the city existed at all. There was only the porch, the fading light, and two people who had spent years standing carefully apart from each other, finally choosing to stop. When they finally pulled back, neither one spoke right away. The silence between them was full instead of empty, charged with everything neither had said aloud until that moment. "I did not plan for this," Vittorio finally said, his voice rough. "Neither did I," Rosa admitted. "But I am not sorry that it happened." He studied her face in the dying light, searching for any trace of doubt or regret, and finding none. "Whatever happens when we go back," he said quietly, "whatever I have to face with Castellano, with Dante, with all of it, I do not want to face it pretending this did not happen." "You will not have to," Rosa said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. But right now, tonight, let us simply have this. Tomorrow, the world can have the rest of us back." They sat together on that porch until the stars came out fully overhead, and for the first time since the night she found him collapsed on his study floor, Rosa allowed herself to believe that whatever waited for them back in the city, they would be strong enough to meet it, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had found something neither expected to find, in a forgotten house 2 hours from everything they thought they knew about their own lives. By the third week, the quiet balance Rosa had worked so hard to build began to feel fragile, stretched thin by news that arrived faster and heavier with each passing day. Claire called again, her voice tighter than before. And this time the update was not something Rosa could simply absorb and set aside. "2 of our smaller clients signed with Castellano Holdings yesterday," Claire said. "Dante is furious, but he cannot reach Mr. Marchetti for approval on the counteroffer that might have kept them. He is starting to make decisions on his own, Rosa. Big ones. I do not think he is doing it out of greed. I think he is doing it because he is scared and does not know what else to do." Rosa thanked her, ended the call, and stood in the kitchen with her hands braced against the counter, breathing slowly, trying to decide how much of this to share with Vittorio and how much would only set his recovery backward at the exact moment his body finally seemed to be healing. She watched him through the window, walking the far path by the creek exactly as she had shown him, his steps steadier now than they had been 3 weeks earlier, his color returned to something closer to healthy. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who was actually taking care of himself instead of simply surviving. She hated the idea of taking that peace away from him, but she also understood, with the same clear certainty that had guided every decision she made since the night she found him on his study floor, that hiding the truth now would only make the eventual return more dangerous. She told him everything that evening, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table, watching his expression shift from calm to focused to something sharper and more familiar, the look of a man doing rapid calculations behind steady eyes. "Dante is not equipped to handle Castellano alone," Vittorio said finally. "He is loyal, and he is smart enough to keep daily operations running, but he does not think the way a real leader has to think when someone is actively trying to take territory. He reacts. He does not anticipate. "Then what do we do?" Rosa asked. "We do not rush," Vittorio said, though the sharpness in his tone made it clear this was as much a reminder to himself as it was an answer to her. "If I return too soon, weak and unprepared, Castellano will see it immediately, and it will confirm every suspicion he already has. I need to be ready, truly ready, not for appearances, for real." Over the following days, something in their routine shifted. The walks continued, the careful meals continued, but new conversations entered their evenings by the fire. Conversations about strategy, about the people Vittorio trusted and the ones he had begun to suspect, about the careful, patient way he intended to reclaim what Castellano was trying to take. Rosa found herself listening closely, offering observations of her own, memories from years of standing quietly in rooms full of powerful men who often forgot she was even there. "There was a man who came to the estate twice last year," she said one evening. "Tall, always wore gray suits. He met privately with Dante both times, never went through the front office the way your other partners did. I remember it because Dante seemed nervous both times, checking the hallway before he let the man in." Vittorio's eyes sharpened. "Describe him again." She did, in careful detail, and watched as something dark and thoughtful crossed his face. "That sounds like someone connected to Castellano," he said slowly. "If Dante has been meeting with him privately, even before I disappeared, that is not a coincidence I can afford to ignore." "You think Dante is working against you?" "I think," Vittorio said carefully, "that fear makes people do things they would never do with a clear head. Whether Dante meant to betray me or simply made a mistake trying to protect the company in my absence, I will not know until I am standing in front of him. But I need to be prepared for either possibility." Rosa felt a chill move through her at the thought of returning to a house full of quiet threats and hidden agendas, so different from the peaceful, honest rhythm they had built together in this small, forgotten place. She thought of the porch, the fire, the long, unhurried conversations, and felt a sharp pang of loss, even though they had not yet left. "I am not afraid of going back," Vittorio said, watching her face carefully, as if reading the thought written there. "I am only afraid of what it might cost us. This peace we found here. I do not want to lose it the moment we walk back through those doors." "We will not lose it," Rosa said, though her voice held less certainty than she wanted it to. "We will simply have to protect it, the same way you will protect your company." He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip steady and warm, so different from the trembling weakness she had felt beneath her fingers the night she found him collapsed on the floor. "Whatever happens," he said, "I need you to know that this was never just about hiding from the company or recovering my strength. Somewhere in these 3 weeks, this became about you, about us. I do not know how to separate the two anymore, and I am not sure I want to." Rosa held his gaze, feeling the weight and warmth of his words settle over her like something solid and real. "Then, we go back together," she said. "Not as employer and employee pretending nothing happened, as two people who found something worth protecting, walking into a fight neither one of us can face alone." Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass surrounding the small house, and somewhere far beyond the hills, in a city growing more dangerous with each passing day, an empire waited for its leader to return, unaware that the man walking back through its gates would be entirely different from the one who had vanished 30 days before, stronger in ways that had nothing to do with power, and more vulnerable in ways that had everything to do with love. Dante Rizzo had not slept properly in 19 days. He sat behind Vittorio's own desk now, the leather chair still smelling faintly of the cologne his boss had worn for over a decade, and stared at a stack of contracts he was not entirely sure he had the authority to sign. Around him, the office hummed with the same quiet efficiency it always had. Phones ringing, assistants moving between rooms, the appearance of a company running exactly as it should. But Dante knew better than anyone how thin that appearance had become. He rubbed his eyes and looked again at the report in front of him. 2 more clients had shifted their contracts to Castellano Holdings that week, both citing vague concerns about instability, both refusing to say directly what everyone in the building already suspected. Word had gotten out somehow, despite every effort to contain it, that Vittorio Marchetti had not been seen in nearly 3 weeks. Rumors filled the gaps where facts should have been. Some said he had fled the country. Others whispered that he was gravely ill, perhaps even close to death. A few of the more dramatic voices suggested he had simply lost his nerve and abandoned the company entirely. None of it was true, but Dante had no way to correct the record without revealing just how little he actually knew. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Grace Whitfield stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her expression carefully neutral in the way that had made her one of the most effective negotiators in the city. "Mr. Castellano would like to extend an offer," she said, setting a folder on the desk. "A partnership," he called it. A chance for Marchetti and Castellano interests to work together instead of against each other, given the current uncertainty surrounding your leadership. Dante's jaw tightened. "This is not a partnership offer. This is an attempt to walk through an open door while the owner of the house is away." Grace's expression did not change. Mr. Castellano is simply being practical. A company without visible leadership for this long is a company that invites concern from its partners and its clients. He is offering you a way to stabilize things before that concern turns into something worse. "And if I refuse, then I suppose we will see how much longer the current uncertainty can hold before it collapses on its own," Grace said, and though her tone remained polite, the threat beneath the words was unmistakable. Dante did not sign anything that day. He sent Grace away with a promise to consider the offer, though privately he had no intention of accepting it, no matter how much pressure Castellano applied. But the encounter left him rattled in a way he did not fully understand until later that evening, when he found himself standing outside the private meeting room where, months earlier, he had twice met with a man in a gray suit who claimed to represent interests aligned with Marchetti's own long-term goals. The man's name was Peter Halloway, and Dante had believed, at the time of those meetings, that he was simply gathering information about a potential business alliance that Vittorio himself had quietly explored before growing distracted by his declining health. It was only now, standing in the empty hallway with Castellano's offer sitting unsigned on his desk, that Dante allowed himself to consider a darker possibility. What if Peter Halloway had never represented an independent interest at all? What if those meetings had been Castellano's first quiet attempt to gather information about the company's inner workings, using Dante's own uncertainty and desire to prove himself capable in Vittorio's absence? The thought made his stomach turn. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had not used in months, a private investigator named Edward Coleman who had done discreet work for the company in the past. Always careful, always thorough, always willing to dig into places official channels could not reach. "I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Peter Halloway," Dante said quietly into the phone. "And I need you to find out if there is any connection between him and Castellano Holdings." Edward agreed, and Dante hung up feeling only marginally better, aware that whatever Edward uncovered might confirm a betrayal that had been sitting quietly beside him for months, disguised as an opportunity. Meanwhile, across the city, in a modern office building with glass walls and a view that stretched clear to the harbor, Nathan Castellano leaned back in his chair and studied the latest report on Marchetti's declining client base with quiet satisfaction. 3 weeks of patient, careful pressure had already yielded more progress than he expected. Small clients first, then the mid-sized ones would follow once they saw how easily the larger company could be shaken. By the time Vittorio Marchetti returned, if he returned at all, there might not be much of an empire left worth reclaiming. "You seem pleased," Grace said, entering his office with the same folder she had shown Dante earlier, now marked with a note about his refusal to sign. "Rizzo is holding out longer than I expected," Nathan admitted, "but he is running the company on borrowed time, not real authority. employees can feel the difference. Clients can feel it even more. Patience is all this requires now. And if Marchetti returns before the company fully destabilizes? Grace asked. You have built this entire plan around the assumption that he will not. Nathan's expression sharpened slightly. If Marchetti returns healthy and sharp, we adjust. But every day he stays hidden. Every day his own people grow more nervous and uncertain. Works entirely in our favor. A man does not vanish for weeks without a serious reason. Whatever kept him away, it will have left a mark on him. Weakness does not simply disappear because a man decides to walk back through his own front door. Grace said nothing, though something in her expression suggested she was less confident in that certainty than Nathan wanted her to be. She had worked in this world long enough to know that underestimating a man like Vittorio Marchetti, even a wounded one, was a mistake that had ended careers before. Back at Marchetti's own offices, Dante received Edward's findings 2 days later, delivered quietly in a plain folder left on his desk without any note attached. He opened it alone, late in the evening, after most of the staff had gone home, and felt his blood run cold as he read through the details Edward had uncovered. Peter Halloway was not, as he had believed, an independent consultant exploring a potential business alliance. He was a longtime associate of Nathan Castellano's, connected through years of quiet financial dealings that traced back well before the 2 meetings Dante remembered so clearly. Dante sat back in his chair, the folder trembling slightly in his hands, understanding now with sickening clarity that he had unknowingly handed Castellano a window into the company's internal operations months before Vittorio ever disappeared. He had not meant to betray anyone. He had believed, genuinely believed, that he was protecting the company's future by exploring new opportunities during a period when Vittorio himself had grown distracted and withdrawn. But belief did not erase consequence, and the consequence now sat heavy and undeniable on the desk in front of him. He thought about calling Rosa, the only person who might know how to reach Vittorio directly, but stopped himself, uncertain whether she would even answer. Uncertain whether revealing this discovery over the phone was wise, given how carefully she had guarded her silence for weeks. Instead, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He began quietly working to undo the damage on his own, reaching out to the clients who had left, offering better terms, working long into the night to shore up the weaknesses Castellano had already begun exploiting, determined to have something solid to show Vittorio when he finally returned, rather than simply a confession of failure. 3 days later, Rosa's phone rang while she stood in the kitchen of the old house, preparing dinner while Vittorio rested on the porch outside. She did not recognize the number, but something told her to answer anyway. "This is Claire," the voice said, quieter and more urgent than usual. "Rosa, I need you to tell Mr. Marchetti something, if you can reach him. Dante has discovered something about a possible connection between one of his old contacts and Castellano Holdings. He believes there may have been a security leak, something that happened months before Mr. Marchetti disappeared. He is trying to fix it quietly, but Rosa, things are moving faster than any of us expected. I do not know how much longer this can hold together." Rosa thanked her, ended the call, and stood very still in the kitchen for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything Claire had just told her settle heavily in her chest. She walked out to the porch, where Vittorio sat watching the sunset with an ease that had become almost natural to him over the past weeks, an ease she now understood might not survive the conversation she was about to have. "We need to talk," she said quietly, and something in her voice made him sit up immediately, all trace of relaxation vanishing from his posture. She told him everything, watching his face harden with each detail, watching the calm, healing man she had come to know over these past weeks give way once again to the sharp, calculating leader she had first met 3 years earlier. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening sky. "A leak inside my own company," he said finally, his voice low and controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. "Months before I even left. Castellano did not simply take advantage of my absence. He planted the seeds long before that. Dante is trying to fix it, Rosa said. He is not your enemy, Vittorio. He made a mistake, but he is working to correct it. I know, Vittorio said quietly, and that matters, but knowing who to trust is not enough anymore. I need to be standing in that building myself, seeing exactly how deep this goes, before Castellano manages to convince my own people that I am never coming back at all. Rosa felt her chest tighten at the resolve in his voice, understanding that the peaceful chapter of their 30 days together was drawing to a close far faster than either of them had wanted. She sat down beside him, taking his hand the way she had every evening for weeks now, and felt him grip it tightly in return. "How much longer do you need?" she asked quietly. "Truly need. Not what pride tells you that you need." He considered the question carefully, running through the truth of his own body, the steadiness that had returned to his hands, the strength that had slowly rebuilt itself in his chest and his legs during their long walks by the creek. "A week," he finally said. "One more week to be certain I am truly ready, not simply well enough to fool everyone into believing I am. After that, we go back and we face whatever is waiting for us." Rosa nodded, though a quiet ache settled in her chest at the thought of their remaining time together shrinking down to a single week, the small, forgotten house that had become something like a home now marked with an ending neither of them could avoid. "1 week," she agreed, "and then we go back together, and we finish what Castellano started." Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and somewhere in the city they had left behind, an empire held together by a loyal but overwhelmed underboss, and a housekeeper's careful silence waited uneasily for the return of the man who had built it, unaware that he was coming back, not weakened by his time away, but transformed by it, carrying a strength forged not through fear, but through healing, trust, and a love neither he nor Rosa had expected to find. The final week at the old house passed differently than the ones before it. Where the earlier days had carried a quiet, healing patience, these last days moved with a sense of urgency neither Rosa nor Vittorio could ignore, even as they tried to hold on to the peace they had built together for just a little longer. Vittorio spent his mornings walking farther and faster along the creek path, pushing his body carefully but deliberately, testing his own strength the way a soldier tests a wound before returning to the field. Rosa watched him closely each time, staying near enough to catch him if his legs gave out, though they never did, his color remaining steady, his breathing even, the healthy vitality of a man who had genuinely rested rather than simply hidden. On the 5th night of that final week, Vittorio sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook Rosa had found for him in a drawer, filling page after page with names, dates, and connections, rebuilding the entire map of his company from memory, marking which relationships he trusted completely and which now needed careful, quiet re-examination. Rosa watched him work, recognizing in his focused intensity the return of the man who had built an empire from nothing, though something in his energy now felt different, less driven by fear and more grounded in clear, deliberate purpose. "You are different than the man who arrived here 30 days ago," she said, setting a cup of tea beside his notebook. He looked up at her, something soft crossing his sharp expression. "I know. I am not sure the company is ready for the version of me that is walking back through those doors. The old me would have marched in already, making threats, demanding answers, terrifying everyone into obedience within the first hour. I do not think that is the leader I want to be anymore." "Then be a different kind of leader," Rosa said simply. "One who commands respect because people trust him, not because they fear what happens if they do not." He reached for her hand, pulling her gently down into the chair beside him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply sitting together in the quiet kitchen, aware that within days this small, borrowed peace would give way to a much harder reality. "I have been thinking about what happens between us once we return," Vittorio said quietly. "I do not want to hide this, not from Dante, not from the rest of the company, not from anyone. But I also understand the position it puts you in. and I will not force anything you are not ready for." Rosa considered his words carefully, feeling the weight of everything they had built together over these weeks settle around her like something solid and real. "I am not ashamed of what happened between us," she said. "But I also know how quickly people in your world look for weaknesses to exploit. If they see this as something that makes you vulnerable rather than something that makes you stronger, it could become a target instead of a strength. Then we make sure they see it clearly," Vittorio said. "Not as weakness, but as exactly what it is. The reason I am standing here at all, healthy and steady, instead of buried by my own pride." She smiled at that, small and genuine, and leaned her head against his shoulder as the fire crackled softly in the next room, the last few quiet evenings of their 30 days slipping steadily away. The morning they finally left, the house looked exactly as it had the day they arrived, the tall grass still swaying gently in the yard, the birds still calling from the same trees, as if the small, forgotten property had simply been waiting patiently for them to return it to its solitude. Rosa packed the car in silence, her movements steady, despite the nervous energy building beneath her calm exterior, while Vittorio stood at the edge of the porch for a long moment, looking back at the small house that had given him something he had not known he was missing until he found it. "Thank you," he said quietly, as she came to stand beside him. "For everything. For finding me on that floor and refusing to let me pretend it was nothing. For bringing me here instead of simply calling for help and letting the company swallow whatever was left of me. For staying, every single day, even when I gave you every reason to walk away." "I never once considered walking away," Rosa said. "Not for a single moment." He turned to look at her then, cupping her face gently in both hands, and kissed her slowly, deliberately, a kiss that held none of the uncertainty of their first one on this same porch weeks earlier, only quiet, steady certainty about exactly what they meant to each other now. They drove back to the city in comfortable silence, the same quiet roads carrying them in reverse, the fields and hills slowly giving way to buildings and traffic, and the familiar noise of a world neither of them had missed nearly as much as they expected. As the skyline came into view, Rosa felt Vittorio's posture shift beside her, his shoulders straightening, his jaw setting with the same sharp focus she remembered from 3 years of watching him move through that estate like a man carrying the weight of an empire on his back. The healer's patient calm remained somewhere beneath the surface. She could see it in his eyes, but layered now with the steel of a man preparing to reclaim what belonged to him. They arrived at the estate just after midday, and the moment the front gates opened, the household staff seemed to sense immediately that something had shifted. Word spread through the halls faster than any phone call could have carried it, and within an hour, Dante himself stood in the entryway, staring at Vittorio with an expression caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "You look well," Dante said carefully, studying him for any sign of the illness rumors had suggested for weeks. "I am well," Vittorio said simply. "Better than I have been in years, in fact. But we have much to discuss, and very little time to waste discussing it gently." Dante's eyes flicked briefly to Rosa, standing quietly beside him, understanding dawning slowly across his face as he pieced together, without needing to be told directly, at least part of what had happened over these past 30 days. He said nothing about it, not then, only nodding and gesturing toward the study where the notebook full of careful, deliberate plans now waited to be put into action. "I found something," Dante said as they walked. "About Peter Halloway. About a connection to Castellano that goes back further than either of us realized." "I know," Vittorio said. "Rosa told me. We will deal with it together. But first I need the complete picture. Every client we have lost, every contract Castellano has taken, every weak point in our current position. I do not want assumptions. I want facts." For the next several hours, Vittorio worked through the details Dante had gathered, his focus sharp and unwavering, his questions precise in a way that left no room for vague answers. Rosa remained nearby throughout much of it, not as staff moving quietly through the background the way she once had, but as someone whose presence Vittorio clearly wanted close, someone whose observations from years of quiet watching proved more valuable than anyone in that room had expected. By evening, a plan had begun to take shape, careful and deliberate, rather than the aggressive, immediate response the old Vittorio might have chosen. They would not confront Castellano publicly, not yet. Instead, they would work quietly to win back the clients who had left, offering not just better terms, but the kind of personal reassurance that only Vittorio's genuine, visible presence could provide. They would trace the full extent of the security leak through Peter Holloway, gathering enough evidence to understand exactly how deep the breach ran before deciding how to address it. And they would watch Castellano carefully, waiting for the moment he grew overconfident enough to make a mistake worth exploiting. "This is not how you would have handled things 3 months ago," Dante observed quietly, as the meeting finally wound down late into the evening. "No," Vittorio agreed. 3 months ago, I would have marched into Castellano's office and made threats I was too exhausted to properly back up. I would have terrified my own people into silence instead of earning their honesty. I nearly destroyed myself, trying to maintain an image of strength that was never real strength at all, only fear, dressed up to look like power. Dante studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his own expression, a quiet respect that had not been there when Vittorio first walked back through the door. "Whatever happened to you these past 30 days, he said, "I think it may have saved this company more than any amount of aggressive posturing ever could have." Vittorio glanced toward the doorway, where Rosa stood quietly, having just returned with a tray of coffee for the exhausted men still working late into the evening. "It was not something that happened to me," he said. "It was someone. And I do not intend to let that go unacknowledged. Not to you, not to anyone in this company, once the current danger has passed." Rosa met his eyes across the room, something warm and steady passing between them, and though the fight ahead of them was far from finished, though Castellano still waited somewhere in the city with his own careful plans, for the first time since they had returned, Rosa allowed herself to believe that whatever came next, they would face it not as two people hiding a secret, but as two people standing together, openly and without apology, ready to protect everything they had built, both in the company and between each other. 2 weeks after his return, Vittorio Marchetti stood in front of a full room of partners, clients, and senior staff for the first time since his disappearance, and the difference in him was impossible to miss. He spoke calmly, clearly, without the sharp, controlling edge that had once colored every word he said in public. He acknowledged, carefully and without excessive detail, that a personal health matter had required his complete withdrawal from company affairs for a period, and that the experience had given him a clearer understanding of what truly mattered in building something meant to last. Several people in the room exchanged surprised glances at the honesty of it, so different from the guarded, image-focused leader they had known for years. By the end of that meeting, 3 of the clients who had shifted their contracts to Castellano Holdings had already expressed quiet interest in returning, citing the same personal reassurance Vittorio had promised Dante he would provide. It was not a single dramatic victory, but a series of small, steady ones, each built on genuine trust rather than fear, exactly the foundation Vittorio had promised himself he would build during those long evenings by the fire in the old house. Nathan Castellano watched these developments with growing frustration from his glass-walled office across the city. The plan that had seemed so certain just weeks earlier now felt increasingly fragile, each returning client a small crack in the careful structure he had built during Vittorio's absence. "He is rebuilding faster than we anticipated," Grace said one afternoon, setting a report on his desk, detailing the latest client to announce their return to Marchetti interests. "Then we stopped being patient," Nathan said, frustration sharpening his usual careful control. "We moved directly against Peter Holloway's information. We take the larger accounts before Marchetti has time to fully reassert himself. If soft persuasion is not going to be enough to hold what we have gained, then we take a harder approach." Grace hesitated. That carries real risk. If Marchetti can prove a security leak connects directly back to us, it exposes everything we have built these past weeks to serious consequences, not just for the company, but legally. The risk of standing still is greater, Nathan said firmly. I did not build this company by hesitating at the first sign of resistance. Word of Castellano's more aggressive shift reached Vittorio within days, delivered through Edward Coleman's careful investigation, which had continued digging even after the initial discovery about Peter Halloway. The picture that emerged was damning and complete, tracing a clear line from Halloway's private meetings with Dante directly back to financial arrangements with Castellano Holdings, arrangements that revealed not just an opportunistic use of Vittorio's absence, but months of deliberate planning that had begun long before he ever collapsed in his study. Vittorio called a private meeting in his study, the same room where Rosa had found him on the floor weeks earlier, though the room itself now felt different, no longer a place of hidden weakness, but a place where a careful, deliberate plan was about to reach its conclusion. Dante sat across from him, along with Edward Coleman and, at Vittorio's insistence, Rosa herself, no longer standing quietly in the background, but seated directly at the table as an equal participant in the discussion. We have everything we need, Vittorio said, spreading the evidence across the desk. Financial records connecting Halloway directly to Castellano. Documentation showing the information he gathered during his meetings with Dante was passed directly along, well before I ever left this house. This is not simply aggressive business practice. This is a deliberate, sustained effort to undermine this company through deception. What do you intend to do with it? Dante asked, his expression tight with the weight of his own earlier mistake still visible beneath his focus. I intend to make sure Nathan Castellano understands, completely and permanently, that this company is not weak, was never truly weak, and will not be taken through deception or exploitation, Vittorio said. But we will not do this through threats or intimidation. We will do it through the truth, laid out clearly enough that every partner, every client, every person watching understands exactly what happened and exactly who was responsible. 100 quote. The plan they built over the following days was careful and precise. Rather than a private, threatening confrontation, Vittorio arranged a public disclosure through proper legal and business channels, presenting the evidence of Castellano's manipulation to a shared board of industry partners who had long served as informal arbiters of disputes between major companies in the city. It was not the dramatic, forceful reckoning that Vittorio might once have chosen, full of intimidation and hidden threats. It was something sharper and more permanent, a public accounting that left Castellano Holdings no room to maneuver, no shadows left to hide the truth of what Nathan had attempted. The meeting took place on a bright afternoon 3 weeks after Vittorio's return, in a formal conference room filled with representatives from a dozen major companies across the city. Vittorio stood at the front of the room, calm and steady, laying out the evidence Edward had gathered with the same clear, deliberate precision that had defined every decision he made since returning from the old house. Nathan Castellano sat rigid in his chair as the details unfolded, his careful composure cracking slightly with each new piece of evidence presented, until finally, the full picture stood undeniable before the entire room. This company built its recent gains on deception rather than competition, Vittorio said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I do not ask this board to punish ambition. Ambition built my own company from nothing, just as it built many of yours. But ambition built on deliberately planted deception, on exploiting a private health matter for aggressive financial gain, is not the kind of competition any of us should be willing to accept as fair practice in this city. By the end of that meeting, the damage to Castellano Holdings' reputation among its peers was severe and immediate. Several partners who had been quietly considering deals with Nathan withdrew their interest entirely, unwilling to be associated with a company now publicly exposed for such calculated manipulation. Nathan left the meeting pale and furious, though even he understood, watching the quiet, unified reaction from the rest of the room, that there was no path forward to salvage what he had built through deception once that deception stood fully exposed. Grace resigned from Castellano Holdings within the month, unwilling to continue working under a leader whose ambition had finally outpaced his judgment so completely. Back at the Marchetti estate, the celebration that followed was quiet rather than loud, a small gathering of the people who had stood by Vittorio through the crisis, Dante among them, his earlier mistake fully forgiven once Vittorio understood the fear and uncertainty that had driven it. Rosa stood near the window of the same study where everything had begun, watching the evening light settle over the grounds, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction at having watched Vittorio reclaim his company, not through fear, but through the patient strength she had helped him rebuild. "You did this," Vittorio said, coming to stand beside her, his hand finding hers naturally, without hesitation, in front of everyone gathered in the room. "All of it. If you had not found me that night, if you had not made the choice to hide me instead of simply calling for help and letting the company consume whatever was left, none of this would have been possible." "You did the hard part," Rosa said. "I only gave you the space to do it." "That is not a small thing," he said quietly. "That may be the largest thing anyone has ever given me." He turned to the room, still holding her hand, and the small gathering quieted, sensing something significant was about to be said. "I want everyone here to understand something clearly," Vittorio said. "Rosa Delgado is not simply the woman who kept this house running these past 3 years. She is the reason I am standing here at all, healthy and whole and thinking more clearly than I have in over a decade. Whatever role she chooses to hold in this house and in this company going forward, I want it understood that she stands beside me now, not behind me." A quiet murmur of approval moved through the room, Dante nodding with genuine warmth, the rest of the small gathering offering the kind of respectful acceptance that came easily once people understood the full truth of what had happened during those 30 missing days. In the weeks that followed, the company continued its steady recovery, client after client returning once they saw the genuine, grounded strength that now defined Vittorio's leadership. Dante proved himself a trusted and capable partner once again, his earlier mistake becoming simply one more lesson learned in a business built on constant vigilance. And Rosa, no longer confined to the quiet role of housekeeper, began taking on a new position within the company itself, her sharp observation and steady judgment proving as valuable in boardrooms as they had once been in the quiet corners of the estate she used to manage alone. On a warm evening several months later, Vittorio and Rosa stood together on the same porch where they had first crossed the distance between them, though this time it was not the old, forgotten house 2 hours from the city, but a quiet corner of the estate grounds that had become, for both of them, a private place to remember exactly how far they had come. 30 days, Vittorio said, watching the sunset with the same peaceful ease he had learned in that small house. 30 days that changed absolutely everything. "Not just for you," Rosa said, leaning against him comfortably. "For both of us." He wrapped his arm around her, and together they watched the light fade slowly over the grounds, no longer a mafia boss hiding a secret and the housekeeper who kept it, but two people who had built something real together, strong enough to weather every storm still waiting somewhere ahead of them, grounded in a trust and love that had grown, quietly and completely, from the moment she refused to walk away and leave him alone on the floor of that study.